we feel like we're doing all the talking here. Are there any questions you might have for us, Carol?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Pluribus. We're kicking off our coverage this week. We will be covering every episode of Pluribus through the end of the first season. Pluribus is the latest show from Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan. There will be 9 episodes of the show. The first 2 have already aired. We have seen those first 2, which just premiered on Apple TV. So we're going to talk about our overall thoughts of the show and talk about some of the specific events that happen in the first 2 episodes, which are entitled We Is Us and Pirate Lady. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Patrick, let's just get right to it with overall thoughts. What do you think of Pluribus so far?
I think Pluribus is a terrible name. I think the marketing for this has been deeply confused. It's one of the greatest pilots to a television show I've ever watched. It's rare that you watch a show and you're like, I'm in the midst of a masterpiece. Yes. And I know it already.
Yes.
These first 2 episodes are incredible, thrilling, scary, funny. It's Vince Gilligan taking the biggest swing. Why does a $1 billion company like Apple exist? If not to let an artist like Vince Gilligan cook at the biggest possible scale. And it nails on everything I possibly could have asked for. I am watching a Twilight Joe premise in television form, and I could not be happier, David. It is
Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone, yes. It is a tremendous 2 hours. I have no idea where this show is going, and I have the utmost confidence that I'm going to be taken somewhere spectacular. I could not be more thrilled with the first 2 hours of Pluribus. I was shook watching it. I was like, I cannot believe how good this show is. Yeah. It is beyond all expectations I had, and my expectations were as high as humanly possible.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way, which sometimes happens on this podcast, but not always when we are in complete agreement on this. But yeah, I mean, this show, and specifically the first episode, it will go down as one of the great pilot episodes of any show in history. I think it just, in terms of the scale of it, it's staggering what they were able to achieve here. TBD on whether the show is going to end up in an interesting place. TBD on what the show is even actually trying to say. But even so far, already, it's given us a lot to sink our teeth into. I will say one other thing before we start talking about what actually happened these first couple episodes. And that is, I first learned of the concept of a generous filmmaker from Roger Ebert. And he talked about it when he was talking about the movie Dark City. And how Dark City is very expansive and shows you a lot of things that you don't need to see. You don't need to see all this stuff, but it's like, hey, guess what? I'm going to build this whole set and show it for you anyway, because I want you to have this experience, right? This is a show that is generous filmmaking. This is like, most times filmmakers will do things to make it easier on themselves. Like, hey, how do we do? And there are so many things he could have done to make it easier on for the show. I'll just give one example. Like, they could have had. I mean, most of the show takes place. I assume will take place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I assume that's because of a combination of tax breaks, and also Vince Gilligan has a crew there that he likes to work with, and
he lives there. He just says this is the city that I love. It's
like Philadelphia for M. Night Shyamalan. It's just like, hey, we're just everything's gonna be set in Albuquerque if possible. Fine. But the show takes place in various other places around the world as well. And he could have not done those. He could have just been like, hey, guess what? Everything's going to be in Albuquerque. But like, the show is so expansive in terms of how far it reaches. And you can tell that the expansiveness adds on just tons and tons and tons of budget.
But it's not flashy. It all feels like
very organic.
Organic and functional and serves a purpose in the narrative. It's not money for money's sake. It's like, well, what if we could dream bigger?
Some of it is money for money's sake. I mean, I think the cold open for episode 2 is one of the most audacious cold opens of any show I've ever seen, and it looks like it cost like $1 million just for that one sequence.
I mean, I think the show is the reports have come out have put in like the average cost of an episode of this being something like $15 million. Like it's an enormously expensive. But even that, I mean, we'll get into that. I love that opening because it's showing without telling. It's spending a ton of money. We'll get into this as we talk about the episodes, but the way this show does it, there's the sequence where Carol is talking to, the vice president of agriculture or whatever. And it's like, all right, how do we do the most thrilling exposition dump possible?
Right.
Because we got to do one.
Yeah.
And then the opening to episode 2 is like, how do we do an exposition dump and not say a word? And this show does both, which is unbelievable.
That's right. It does both. It reminds me of a lot of Westerns, movies like No Country for Old Men, and shows like Breaking Bad, where they'll often show someone doing something and they don't explain what it is. Like they'll just, it's like, here's a random character. They're working, they're doing something with their hand. You have no idea what they're doing. There's no explanation.
Well, it's never process, even explained. Right? Gilligan's talked with this many times. He is go watch Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
This is more Breaking Bad than Better Call Saul.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely. More Breaking Bad.
A lot of Breaking Bad. There's a lot of this in the first episode of Pluribus, in which you watch process. You watch people doing something. It is, if it was described to you on like what happens in this scene, Carol digs a hole. And okay. And yet that is some of the most thrilling television I have watched all year, because Gilligan understands the tension and drama that can be derived out of watching process shot well. Like it is shot in extraordinary fashion, people doing ordinary things, and he gets so much mileage out of that.
Absolutely. So it's super compelling to watch, and it's a much more, I don't even know if efficient is the right word, efficient way of conveying plot details, because often the stuff is not even explained retroactively. Like he just depends on the audience to figure out what was going on. And it really puts the audience in a kind of wonderful participatory state in relation to the show. So thus far, I'm a huge fan of the show and really curious how it's all going to end up. Let's talk about some of the stuff that actually happened in these first 2 episodes. First of all, pluribus, by the way, is a Latin word for those who don't know, and its exact translation is of many or from many. It's probably most well known for being in the phrase e pluribus unum, which means out of many, one, which you can see on dollar bills in the United States. The first episode of the show follows a few separate plot lines. And by the way, at the very beginning of the show, you see a countdown. 439 days and 19 hours or so. Counting
good.
Down.
It's like, what does that mean?
What does it mean? No explanation.
It's ominous.
No
text.
It's
not good.
No text like countdown to 0 day or whatever. Nothing. Just a countdown. But what I gather is that scientists have discovered evidence of extraterrestrial life. They pick up on a signal that's repeating every 78 seconds, coming from 600 light years away. And eventually they've realized that it's actually an RNA sequence. They begin synthesizing the compound in the sequence and testing it on lab rats. But one of the lab rats ends up biting and infecting a scientist, who then starts transferring it to other people around them. I guess we should pause here for a moment, Patrick, and just talk about these sequences with like all the scientists and all that stuff. I mean, here's where some of the scale starts coming in. And just the very first scene, it's reminiscent of other movies of this type. I will say, like, for instance, 28 Days Later had a kind of similar sequence where...
Contact.
A
lot of contact in this.
And you really get a sense of like, just like one tiny... Like, if this scientist hadn't removed their glove, literally world events transpire differently. Right? Like, and how just one... If only... It's a good thing we don't have an example like that from real life in our actual society from the last 5 years.
That would be silly.
That would be ridiculous. But anyway, you get a sense of like, if she hadn't removed this glove, maybe nothing would have happened. And like the world,
or if he hadn't dragged her out, right? Like there are like multiple decisions that occur here where it's like, you've been infected, the rat was caught, you could have left her, quarantined her, and potentially understood something else was happening that doesn't happen. And things go very poorly very quickly.
I think as a society that is extremely primed now to understand the mechanics of infectious transmission, the way that they explained how all this works is really well done. Like no one lays it out and says it's transmitted by saliva. It's transmitted to no one explains anything. They're just like, you see people kissing and you kind of get it. You see the chemtrails and you just kind of get it.
But I have a question.
Yes.
It's one of the more unnerving sequences in the pilot, where at the conclusion of the infection getting out in the lab, they're in almost like a mail room, and they're swabbing each other's mouths and putting them into these. What are they doing?
So I'm not 100% sure, but my understanding. Here's my guess. I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is that they were swabbing their own cheeks and putting it on what's called agar in these petri dishes. And so the idea is that by putting it, that's agar is like a food basically that like allows organisms to be able to thrive. And so I guess they're culturing a lot of their genetic material or like the material that they need to be able to spread the substance. What they use that for, I don't know that that's made super clear. Maybe they put it in the jets, right? Maybe they used it to get like in the second episode, they talk about how they needed to make sure they got the people in the space shuttle and the people in the nuclear submarines and like, like that. And I just love that the show even thought of that stuff. They're like, what are the biggest plot holes of this? Well, what about the people in nuclear submarines?
It thinks of everything but doesn't explain everything.
Yeah,
like it's very
that's right.
You get the sense, because Vince Gilligan has talked about how he was, while they were doing Better Call Saul, and as that show went on much longer than they originally anticipated, he had this idea that was kicking around in his head, and he was writing it while they were in production on Better Call Saul. And you get the sense that he has, I don't know if it's a Bible, right? Like sometimes shows will write out a world Bible. Here are the rules. Here's how everything works. It doesn't mean that we explain all this, but in a writer's room, like if you have a question, refer to the Bible.
Right.
That's how the rules. Like my guess is Vince's head, and he knows how it all works, and could give you an explanation. And maybe there'll be a big long Alan Sepinwall interview where we get into all that later in the year. But there's such a confidence in the world building that I don't know what they were doing in that mailroom, but again, it speaks to like shooting process in a captivating way. Then like, oh, this is ominous. Do I know why? Not really, but I know that it's bad. And the show very quickly establishes whatever questions you have, we're going to answer the ones that need to be answered so that you understand how the world works. But we're also going to leave enough ambiguity that you get to sit and ponder how it might have all played out. That's fun.
Agreed. So, but my sense from that scene is that they're growing the genetic material. Like whatever they're using it for, they're growing it, they're cultivating it to deploy it in various ways.
And they're licking donuts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're licking donuts. They're doing everything to make this happen. They're growing it in petri dishes. They're licking donuts. They're deploying it. They're aerosolizing it and dropping it from the sky. So anyway, yeah. Meanwhile, we also meet Carol Sturka, the author of romance novels, who's finishing up her book tour. We get to see one of her book tour events at a Barnes Noble. She's reading from one of her books from the book Blood Song of Waikaro, which is the fourth book in the Winds of Waikaro trilogy. We also learn a few things about Carol. She is not a fan of her books. Like she thinks it's terrible populist entertainment.
I think she also is an artist struggling to reconcile what has made them popular and beloved with what they actually want to do. You know what I mean? Like, how do you make your money? How do you find success? What do people think you're good at? And she looks at it as a slop and not her sort of like true calling. She talks, I forget what the book is called, the Crystallis or something.
Bitter Chrysalis is the serious book that she's working on. Yeah. I was wondering while watching this, like, is this how Vince Gilligan feels about his own work? I was wondering, does he like look with a mild disdain upon Breaking Bad and think, oh, that was the popular thing I did, but this show, Pluribus, this is what I really want to say about humanity.
I've read a lot of interviews with him. Yeah, he seems like such a I'm so grateful that people like. He
seems very proud of his work.
Now, granted, that I guess part of what Carol, if you want to read into Gilligan, presupposes is, well, of course you would say that publicly. But then what do you... I think he has said in interviews that Carol's private bitterness is closer to how he feels about his true self. And he sees a lot of himself in Carol's like thoughts and views on the world. So you might be right. Like maybe the thoughtful yeehaw Vince Gilligan in interviews, it's a version of Vince Gilligan. But, when left to your own thoughts and devices, around a drink, maybe one creeps into a different mode.
I do think that when you go from Breaking Bad to Better Call Saul to this, each work seems progressively more thoughtful than the last. I'm not saying which is better or worse, but I just think I do think Better Call Saul was a far more introspective show than Breaking Bad. Personally,
I don't think that is. I think that is as far as one can get objectively true.
Yeah.
Breaking Bad is like a good series, but it's very popcorny and can be like introspective and serious. But I mean, Better Call Saul is just like from the jump,
right,
in that mode, and it's very interesting to see. I think you can see an arc between the art that he is making that is getting more introspective and honestly slower as he goes through these shows. That is very interesting, contrasted with his origins as a series writer on the X-Files.
Speaking of showing not telling, I liked how there's this kind of gradual reveal that Helen, who is Carol's manager, is also her romantic partner. Right. They don't make that super clear right from the jump, and they kind of hold hands a little bit in the car. And then as time goes on, you get this, oh wow, they actually live together. They're actually romantic. Which is kind of a cool reveal when it happens. And then when Helen is ultimately put into jeopardy, it is very, very distressing. Also, by the way, I just want to say I felt like, whether or not Carol represents Vince Gilligan, I felt like some of the people that Carol encounters at Barnes & Noble were definitely based off of Vince Gilligan fans.
Well, I think that's just fandom, right. In a lot of well-meaning people who, in various ways, step up to and beyond the interaction one has with someone they admire and like. I think that is. I am sure that is part. I mean, this is Breaking Bad is a show that those poor people who keep buying the house with the with the pizza thrown on it. Like, putting up fences around. I mean, fandom is complicated.
Yeah. By the way, I like the fake titles that the show has. Right, it has this book called Blood Song of Waikaro, and then at the bookstore at the airport. Carol wants Helen to take books from the bottom of her books from the bottom of the shelf, replace them with the books on top of the shelf, and those books on top of the shelf were written by a woman named Diana Gabaldon, I think it is, and the title of the book was "Go Tell the Bees That I Am Gone," which I just thought was a brilliant title for a book. I'm just like, wow, very evocative. Anyway, so Carol and Helen are decompressing after a long book tour at a bar. And then all of a sudden they step outside. Carol sees that planes are deploying some kind of chemical through the sky. And then everyone starts freaking out and you realize everyone's been infected by whatever is going on. And this sequence is just a tour de force. I mean, unbelievable. There's one long continuous shot where Carol is driving away and she sees like all this carnage happening. Because essentially what happens is when this virus whatever you want to call it, they don't even explain it very well. Purposefully so. When this creature, this being, this hive, what I'm going to call it, I think is a hive mind. Maybe over time we'll find out what the nomenclature is. But when the hive mind starts taking over, there's a transition period where people start convulsing uncontrollably or they're frozen in place for minutes. And depending on what you're doing at that moment can dictate whether or not you live or die and survive this event. We later learn that something on the order of 850 million people died during this. 886 million people died during the takeover. Patrick, that felt a little high to me. I'm not gonna lie to you.
That would, if you'd like pause the episode and like, all right, let's do some over unders. Like closest to, I would have guessed how many people are on the planet.
Right. Well, I think it's like something like 8 to 9 billion, right? 8.14 billion people or so. So that's a little bit over
that. Like when you think of
it's
it
a little over 10%,
way,
which is like that's reasonable, right? If you think about it as like a little over 10%.
When you think of like how many different ways over the course of a day, if you just
frozen place,
or like hit the ground, like the way that
Helen
It's
does.
Helen, right? Like, like, it falls backward and could just like smash your head into to the concrete. All the sorts of different ways things could go poorly. That number makes a lot of, think of the complicating factors of like a plane falling, lighting a fire that like takes out a neighbor. I mean, the numbers get pretty staggering pretty quickly, but it's part of what makes the show.
Anyone in cars is probably dead, right? Anyone in cars at that time is probably dead. So right there, that's probably like 1 to 2% of the world's.
I think it's. I've watched lots of invasion of the. This is definitely in the invasion of the body snatchers sort of like sci-fi realm. This is a well-worn trope in terms of sort of an alien invasion sort of idea. But what Pluribus does really well, I think, and part of it is the scale of the show and what it uses in its money, is it manages to like make the local and the human feel very real, and the scale take on a very human form that is, it gives the show a lot of weight. And it's different than how the show could have been approached, was just hyper local and like what would happen to this one person. It's like, no, it manages to exist on this global scale, but starts on a local scale and then works its way up.
The show looks like it cost a lot of money. So no, I'm not denying that in any way, but I will say one of the things I think the show does really well is realizing just by having lots of people act in concert, it can create a really compelling effect.
Yeah, and that's not CG, but it's still it's expensive to stage massive sets with dozens, hundreds of people. I mean, like many of those tracking shots is like, I assume she's driving, like, and the car is on the hood of the car, and like she's going through these like she's going through these like apocalyptic. I mean, that is. I imagine staging that a couple of times is itself, millions of dollars, and they get so much like that's where I want money spent. Like on like massive blocking.
Well, there's a scene too when those creepy kids come up and they explain to her about where her spare key is, and then she says, "Leave me alone." And so they're like, "Okay, just give us a couple minutes to clear out." And then like you see the camera pan from one side to the other, and all the people get in the cars and they drive away in the sequence. And
imagine how much practice went into synchronizing the cars to, because I assume that was done physically. I mean, could you fake that with CG? Probably, but I'm given everything else in the show, I'm assuming they shot that with actual cars, and like it seems like a simple trick, but like that was probably weeks of preparation to get that one shot off.
Yeah, it's incredible, and there's a lot of shallow depth of field in the show where Carol's in focus, and then in the background you see all these little people doing stuff that happen. There's many shots like that are like that, and you can only do that if everyone on the planet is behaving like a hive mind. So anyway, everyone gets infected except for Carol. She's one of only about a dozen people on the planet that are not impacted by this, and this alien species, whatever it is, this infectious force, this hive mind, acknowledges this and wants to keep people like Carol comfortable. Why is that the case? Well, because when Carol has negative, strong emotions, it can actually result in a lot of these hive mind people freezing up and potentially dying, like if they're driving a car or something like that. So Carol actually has the power to kill a lot of these hive mind people, but Carol doesn't want to do that because in Carol's mind, they're actually all still like individual people that can be theoretically freed from this fate. And so she doesn't want to be responsible for the deaths of all these people. Also, the hive mind has a rule against harming other creatures. So they will not murder other people. They will not murder other animals and so on. But yeah, I think the whole way that the first episode unfolds and the way Carol receives the information, which is like she turns on the TV and then sees a message telling her to dial this phone number as though the entire world has been optimized explicitly for her, is just really well done. And they at first I thought, oh, that's the president, but then the guy explains he's the Secretary of Agriculture or Undersecretary of Agriculture. And he also happened to be fully intact and also have a suit. So he's like, so that's why you're looking at me. And it's like, well, what happened to the president? And he's like, yeah, the president is dead. And also a lot of the top, people in the government are also dead. And I was just like, I wonder what happened there. Like, did you have a kind of headcanon of what happened in that situation? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I suspect there's more that, there's a lot more we don't know about
Right.
what's going. My running theory right now is that what we're seeing is just a very unique form of an alien invasion, which is how do you show up with warships like Independence Day and level everything out, or do you essentially have humanity undo themselves, pacify themselves, and then an alien race could come in, consume the resources of a planet, and move on? Like that seems like pretty, or at least on the table as one of the scenarios. So I think there's reason to wonder, like, of the hundreds of millions that died, were some of those strategic in nature? I suspect there's more to that story that we don't know. But I thought it was a delightful. There's so many ways you can look at it. Like you can see some of that exchange between Carol and the TV as a commentary on like social media algorithms and how the world is customized to every single, you're the most important person. Everything is, you're only seeing the things that you want to see. And doesn't that make you happy? And this whole pull between the individual and collectivism that is at the heart of one of the themes of the show that I expect it to return to over and over, like, is really just epitomized in this. Like, it's an incredibly funny scene, and it was if you listen to the clip that you played at the top, the trailer includes one of the highlight sequences of this exchange that Carol has, in which she's finally like, well, we're doing all the talking. Do you have any questions? And essentially she says,
what the fuck is happening?
And the trailer cuts to it in a very kind of comedic fashion. In the moment, it's like bone chilling. Like,
well, she says, I think she says, what the fuck is happening?
What the fuck? But the way she says it is not funny at all. Like, it is her at her core, like screaming through an impossible to fathom situation. And it like really gets under your skin. And so it's, just a really great exchange all around.
Yeah. Yeah. Really well done. And that's roughly where the first episode ends, is her talking with David Taffler, Secretary of Agriculture, learning a bunch about what actually happened here, learning about, they do give some rare exposition about this sequence that happened that they would then kind of built the substance out of and then ended up infecting everyone. But really, everyone is very happy. They are a hive mind. They're very happy. One time I've seen this kind of thing depicted recently, Patrick Klepek. I don't know if you saw the season 2, episode 3 episode of Rick and Morty called Autoerotic Assimilation.
I watched like the first couple seasons of that show,
yeah.
so I
this
don't
is
recall it.
Yeah, I'm reading here from fandom.com. Rick, Morty, and Summer stumble upon a hive mind named Unity that Rick used to date. Summer objects to Unity's control over an alien planet's population, end quote. So this is when Rick is they discover a planet, and the planet is the hive mind. The planet basically is the same thing as what you see in Pluribus, and also Rick used to date the planet, and that creates some complications. But anyway, very reminiscent of that, and obviously many other horror shows and horror movies and so on and so forth. But that was the one that immediately came to mind because that depiction in Rick and Morty was also kind of comedic. And this one is also occasionally comedic as well.
Well, occasionally. So there's two things I wanted to point out before we move on to the second episode.
Yeah.
One of my favorite shots, one of my favorite choices is when Carol takes Helen to the hospital. And there's a moment where there's a woman at the counter and she has a baby.
The baby
carrier that is like, as she's sort of convulsing, the carrier looks like it's going to fall off of the counter.
Yeah.
And the show makes a very deliberate choice to not show you what's happening in the baby carrier.
In the baby carrier, yeah.
But Seahorn's like on her face, which is brilliant actor, but it's her face that like does so much. Like what makes her such a unique actor. She tells you all you need to know. I don't need to see a CG baby convulsing to know, like, oh, this is everybody. And it's just a brilliant, really unsettling little sequence. And the other point I wanted to make, it's one of the things I love about the show so much, is like you just pointed out Rick and Morty. Most shows about a high concept idea like this lean into the comedic parts of it.
Mhm.
And something I couldn't quite tell in the marketing in the lead up to the show was, what is the tone of this show? And Breaking Bad, serious show, also very funny at times when it wanted to or needed to be. Same with Better Call Saul. But Pluribus like takes this concept very, very seriously and
Yeah.
on its face and treats it with horror. And yes, there are also like lighthearted moments because this is Gilligan's approach. But one of the things I really appreciated was like, this isn't a comedy. Like, this is
Mhm.
closer to The Leftovers than anything else. It's not as
Yeah.
dour as The Leftovers, but it's on a spectrum. It's leaning in that direction. And The Leftovers is one of my favorite shows of all time. And so I don't need something to be as like profoundly upsetting as The Leftovers. But I loved by the end of the first episode being like, wow, the tone of this show, the approach is going to be, again, it's why I said in the intro, it's taking what would have been an episode of The Twilight Zone. And you could have ended this pilot and just said it was an episode of The Twilight Zone. And I think it would have been a very expensive, successful installment in like a high concept, creepy idea. But the idea then, now we're going to spend 2 committed seasons at least exploring what this is. Like, what's better than this?
Agreed. This show is a reason why a podcast like this should exist.
Yes.
You know, is to kind of dissect
And why
every
you
episode.
do it episodically. Like, this is
Yes.
like this show dropping all at once. Go fuck yourself. Like, this is why the episodic drop exists.
A couple things I want to mention too, right? One is I think the Ray Seahorn's performance. And by the way, my understanding is it is pronounced Ray Seahorn for those who are curious. It's not pronounced like how it's read. I think it's almost bordering on brave this episode because she spends about half the first episode at a 10, and in terms of emotional intensity, and that just must have been really hard to do because obviously it took probably weeks to shoot this.
And it's
And so
just her. This isn't a show with characters. It's
Right.
Carol.
Right. And so I can imagine like before every take, she needs to be like, okay, in this scene, she needs to be panting. She needs to be freaking, and that goes on for many, 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 many minutes, like throughout the whole course of the first episode. So I just think it's a really tremendous performance by her. Also, I meant to say in response to what you said about the president potentially getting assassinated in the show, agreed that it's very possible these creatures have more sinister aims than what the show lets on. Or she said, Zosia says we can't kill things really, like under any circumstances. I'm curious if there's any exceptions to that. But it's also possible the president was just in Air Force One or a motorcade at the time, right? And then that was it. That's all she wrote for the president in the show, of course. So anyway, just a random thought. Let's talk about episode 2 of Pluribus. And this one was a lot slower than the first episode, but still very, very interesting. We do learn some things like that Carl's emotions can really negatively impact the creatures and potential. And I think the idea is that she can cause them to seize up, and then if they're in the middle of doing something that's dangerous, they'll then die. That was kind of my interpretation. And that apparently it can be widespread. Like if she gets angry, it can go all around the world. And what we learn is that she ended up killing 11 million people, which is, as she points out, Stalin numbers. I mean, that's just huge. Mass murderer numbers.
Not rookie numbers.
Not
Stalin
rookie numbers. Not rookie numbers. Stalin numbers. But let's talk briefly about the cold open in episode 2. 2 people drag a dead body out of a burned car, and then this woman trades places with this motorcyclist. She drives this motorcycle through the streets of, I think it's Tangiers, and then gets on a C-130 plane and flies it to the United States.
Take that, Nathan Fielder.
And I mean, just the whole sequence is mind blowing. It takes place with no words, and
they don't need to talk. When
they don't need to talk.
None of the 11 present. There is no reason for verbal
Yeah.
communication. And the way that takes the logic of the show of transferable skills between
Right. Yeah.
different hosts it's just shown, and it's extraordinary.
And this is what I'm talking about the generous filmmaking. Like, you didn't need to show all those shots of her riding down the beautiful streets and this amazing background with CG effects of these ships burning. It's like, you didn't need to do all. You could have she could have gotten the motorbike and then cut to she's on the plane. Like, she arrives at the airport. But they are like, we're gonna show her whole trip to the plane. Like, all this stuff, and it's just, oh my god, it's incredible.
When
It's
Vince does this,
yeah.
the Gilligan does this all the time in his work. Like, his pacing is so much slower than it, quote, needs to be. It's part of his style. Like, it's part of his aesthetic and again, it's like process filmmaking. Like, this is an extension of that, is showing the process of like this body being, like transported, and like generous is a great way to put it. And it just also accomplishes so much narratively and in terms of the world building, where kind of how much do you want to know as the audience member, right? Like, how much do you want to engage? Like, the show is ultimately about Carol and like her story. But like, if you want to think about the fun implications of that, well, here are your avenues into that. But if you just want to follow the personal drama of Carol, like, the show's got plenty to offer there as well.
So Helen has passed away due to the events of the hive mind transference. Did you have an interpretation on why that was? My sense was that it's possibly because Helen fell down during the transference and hit her head, and that might have been what killed her. Another possible explanation is maybe the combination of that plus Carol's intense emotions during that time period, which we know are able to impact the hive mind. So I don't know.
I thought, like, if you consider it like kind of like an organ transplant, like sometimes it just doesn't take. Like, I think that, or my first interpretation was when they show the phone being shattered. It just gave you
hits her head.
It gave you a sense of how hard like she fell, and that if you were to fall backwards on your head, that would cause like pretty quickly internal bleeding in your brain. It would not be shocking for some. So I think either of those works, but that's kind of what I took away from why Helen died.
So Carol's trying to bury Helen in the backyard, and through a series of sequences, we see the hive mind send Carol someone who looks like her original conception of who the character of Raban would be in her books. We learn that that she originally had a conception of Raban that was a woman, and that only her and Helen knew about this, and so they sent her someone that looked like that character to be able to converse with her
from all the way around
the world. They're like, we've identified one person who looks like somebody you dreamed of. Guess what? It's your job today to be nice to this person and make sure they don't get pissed and kill a lot of people. So yeah, it's amazing. I will say, I wish there had been a little bit more of a transition from her getting into the shower to then she shows up at the door. Like, it took me a while to be like, is that her? Because she's all covered with dirt. I didn't even like really recognize her when I first saw her in the backyard. So
I'm with you. I had to kind of put that together myself a little later.
I wish there'd been just a shot of her like getting out of the shower and putting on the hair and all this stuff. But anyway, so Carol is apprised of the situation. I love the ways that the hive mind tries to help her out with dropping off the digger right in her back. It's just like it reminded me a little. I'm not saying this is what I'm about to say is a bad thing, but it reminded me of like, you didn't see Chernobyl yet, did you?
I watched half the show and then for some reason didn't finish the rest.
Incredible show, but basically like hearing Craig Mason talk about it, he was saying how the Soviet Union is one of the only places where Chernobyl could have happened because of the neglect, but it's also one of the only places where Chernobyl could have been fixed. And that's because they have the ability to throw massive quantities of human life at a problem, don't even care if these people live or die until the problem is solved. And that's in fact what ends up happening, right? And it just kind of shows you, when you see something like that, it's not a good thing, but it is like it's the scale of it is awe-inspiring in a way, because like, oh, like I didn't know like just human beings are capable of that. If if left with no inhibitions, that human beings are capable of such things. And the idea of like, hey, I can snap my fingers and like my mind can coordinate with a helicopter to pick up a digging device and then drop it off in your backyard in like 3 seconds. It's like wow, like what is possible if anything is possible? It's mind blowing to consider. Anyway,
Yeah, and I think there's I think episode 2 is still really good, but is sort of inherently messier because I think the first episode is setting up the high concept and the world, and then the second episode is now we're doing a television show. You know what I mean? And so
right.
I think that transition, which is why I appreciate how much it slows down, right? Is like this episode for at least the first half is about Carol putting Helen in the ground, paying her respects to her partner. And it's a sequence that could have been a montage, could have been a couple of minutes, but takes up half the episode as it sort of like lingers through process and ends up explaining a lot of like probably what a lot of the dynamics are going to be with Carol and like how this world operates in the future. So it does some sort of setting the chess pieces like where they need to be, so you can kind of figure out where attention point's going to be in further episodes. But I like that the show goes from so bombastic and apocalyptic to, well, now we got to put a hole in the ground. And it's a very Vince Gilligan thing to do.
Yeah. I am really curious if the show is trying to say anything about white women's emotions. That is something I'm curious about. Like when I look at Vince Gilligan's work in the past, it has not really been explicitly political, in my opinion. But I am curious. You have this woman who is, when she is emotional, people die. That's a thing that happens in the show. Millions of people die on the show. And so anyway, that's just kind of an open question for me. I don't think we've seen enough of the show to make that conclusion as to what he's trying to say. But I'm like, it is a white woman who is in the text of the show the most emotional out of all the quote unquote survivors. And so anyway,
well, and I will. I'm not sure how much this will bleed into the show, if Gilligan will talk about it at all, but very infamously, I guess, over the course of Breaking Bad, right? Like Anna Gunn took an enormous amount of shit, undeserved, over the character of Skylar being this like whiny wife that is, there's very misogynistic criticism is not the right word for it, but like directed at Anna Gunn.
I would say unhinged, unacceptable behavior. Like people attacking not the character, literally the actor that plays her.
Right.
It's complete, just batshit nonsense that people would do such a thing,
Right. And it was like something that happened especially once the show took off on Netflix halfway through its run, and it went from like an AMC hit to a pop culture phenomenon, like really disgusting stuff that she had to suffer through over the course of that show. So I wonder how much of that, again, as you're pointing out, a character who is like a woman whose emotions then can trigger the deaths of millions because of the setup of the show. It's just interesting material to be playing with, given and he's talking. It's not as like he's spoke out very forcefully against the audience or the sectors of the audience that were directing this at Anna Gunn, saying it was ridiculous and misogynistic. So he's aware of this thing that occurred alongside Breaking Bad. And so I wonder how much of that he is conscious of, is, thinking about as he writes a character who, as you put, like her emotions dictate the life and death of millions potentially.
Carol wants to talk with other people who are unimpacted by the hive mind's invasion, and she learns that 5 others of them can speak English. So she asks to meet with them. There's a very cool sequence when she says, "Can I meet with them? I want to meet with them." And then Zosha says, "Hold on," and then they agree. I love that sequence implies a lot of what is actually going on. So she flies out 2 days and 2 hours. At one point we didn't even talk about this, but the clock starts counting up. We assume from the day that everyone is infected, right?
I wonder how present that will be for the rest of the show.
Right. I do think it's helpful to understanding how much time has passed. So by the end of episode 2, only 2 days and 16 hours have passed from the kind of 0 day of when the infection began. But
and they have said, I wonder if this will play into I suspect this is going to be some part of the cliffhanger for, because we know this is at least a 2-season commitment, that they put a rough timeline on being able to sort of crack what's going on with Carol.
Mhm.
Like, we expect to solve this, like, not for a couple of months. So I wonder if part of understanding the time is understanding the clock that Carol is up against in terms of retaining her individuality.
Right. Yeah, because Zosia does say something like, we're 4 months away from that at least. Or we're months away from being able to absorb you, assimilate you into our hive mind, at least.
But it's very easy for me to imagine that maybe that becomes a choice amongst the last 11, where do you join the collective or retain your individuality? Anyway, just something I was thinking about.
No,
I was trying to
totally.
think, like, why would the time still be present? I understood the count down.
Yeah.
Why have a count up? I wonder if that will be a race against the clock at some point later in the series.
Totally. Great point. But yeah, she meets with the other people, and I think it goes about as poorly as it could have gone. Like, Carol does not have a good read of the room. It's actually a very good object lesson in understanding your audience.
She's not a great pitch woman. Got that part's not helping her case, but also, yes, they did not read the room whatsoever.
It turns out that writers might not necessarily be the best, most gregarious presences to convince people to do things, Well,
it sets her up uniquely. She's lost literally everything.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't have much, right? Like, she had her partner. Her partner is gone. These other folks have various degrees of their family. How one defines, family, and whether these are people. I'd say not an open question. I'm with Carol on this one. You're all lying to yourselves about what the situation is.
Right.
But you can imagine it putting yourself in the shoes of these people. Like, yes, I guess is not my family anymore, but it's all I got. And she doesn't even have that.
Yeah. I do think, Patrick, that there's something distinctly American about Carol's point of view in this scene. In the
I've
sequence
seen that pointed out, where it's like,
when she's talking with the other 5 people, and none of the other people are Americans. And
I think it's a very specific choice to have her be the singular American white woman.
Yes,
in this,
and she's
in
like,
this table.
We can solve this. We can beat this. We can do. And it's like, other people are like, what is? First of all, what is actually bad about this? Right? Like, the only thing that's bad is that your individuality is removed. Right? And a lot of people don't care about that. Like, that's just not important for a lot of people. And I think we see that demonstrated in vivid effect in this sequence where she kind of talks to these other people.
Or that race, class, sex, like, these are not markers we use to judge one another anymore. Like, one of the characters points out, like, the world is peaceful. Now, granted, it's been a day. So, I think drawing
2 days and 2 hours.
Right, drawing huge sweeping conclusions about this is better, y'all. But I take the point,
but
right?
Yes, there's no violence, there's no murder anymore, right? Like, as he says, there's no prisons, right? Everyone can work together to accomplish goals. No
prisons
together.
For the animals. Yeah, that was a very little funny aside.
Yeah. I think it will become important later. Is my guess. But anyway, so I think it's notable that it's a very American point of view, I would say. And many Americans may not like. I think if you're watching the show and you're American, you'd be like, "Oh, well, Carol's the one who I'm meant to root for." But putting aside the fact that her view is distinctly American, and when I say American, what I mean is like individualistic. I mean, we have to win. Like, we're gonna win at the end. Somehow, we're gonna win. Somehow, we just need to figure out how we're gonna win. Like, those are, I think, distinctly American ideals that dominate American society in a way that I don't feel like they necessarily dominate other societies. Certainly not other societies which are more collectivist, which care more about the common good rather than the individual good, that don't prize the individual person above all other aspects.
I'd be fascinated if anyone listening to this, like, if you saw, especially if you're like non-American, like, did you see yourselves in your culture? Like, it's very easy, I think, for me to have sat and watched. Like, yeah, Carol,
right.
Yeah, I mean, you're being a little antagonist. Like, I don't know about the attitude, but like, you're right. Like, we should beat this thing. I do wonder if folks different
Yeah.
backgrounds from different cultures, if you like walked in and was like, what's this Carol more like Karen? What are we doing
Right,
over
absolutely.
here? You know,
I
I'd be
mean,
fascinated. What
I'm
other?
telling you that I was. Well, you're right. You and I both agree that she needed to work on the pitch. Like,
Yeah.
regardless of what the actual attitude was, she was ineffective at trying to convince people.
Right.
of
I
her
think
way.
rolling over to an alien invasion is perhaps not necessarily. We can have a conversation about all is one, but like I don't know if necessarily just handing it over to an alien signal is necessarily a good thing. Carol, that should be an easy thing to get across the finish line, and instead you're lonelier than ever.
That's right. So like we don't disagree on the efficacy. But yeah, if you do have thoughts on this, I will say I do not consider myself a well-traveled person. I do not consider myself like cosmopolitan
Same.
or anything.
Yes.
But as I've tried to expose myself to like other cultures and their ways of life over the course of the last year or so, as I've contemplated, for instance, spending more time where I am right now, which is in Portugal, I have opened my mind to the. It's like this David Foster Wallace thing of like. I think it was David Foster Wallace told the story of like two fish, and one of them says to the other one, "Hey, wow, the water's warm today, huh? The water's nice today." And then the other fish says, "What's water?" Right? And like in America, there's just all these ideals and concepts that everyone just feels this way about. Oh, of course, we'd all hate the alien invasion, right? But then it's like not everyone would like. What if it's actually nice? What if it's actually nice that we're all like unified together for the first time? Now,
Well, and even just like it's in America is less common, for example, of like multi-generational households, right?
Right.
Like it is common abroad for people to have grandmothers, like
Yes.
grandchildren, like all stuffed in. And so, and again, this is a high concept alien invasion sort of show, but the idea of like big family units operating as one in a single place
yes,
that has echoes of like a singular unit working as a collective as opposed like that, like it makes sense to me why some folks might look at what happens as not that different from what we had before, or an
even
extension
an upgrade,
of what we
an upgrade, which is like I think a really well done, like a really
now my
interesting
kids
idea that's
listen
well
to
presented.
me. I mean, this is wonderful, you know. And if I need open heart surgery, I'm good to go.
If you are not from America, I am really curious what your opinion on this scene was in the second episode of Pluribus, where Carol is presenting her ideas to this international group of people. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Let us know. We'll read your email on the air if you have some insight to offer in this regard. Anyway, what else to discuss in the second episode? I mean, there is we meet one of the most memorable characters of the show, right? Which is there is this guy Kumba Diabate, who shows up late in Air Force One. I love the way the show presents how the hive mind would describe something and then shows you the reality, right? So it's like, oh yeah, he was a little late because he requested a specific aircraft. And then you find out that it's Air Force One, and it's like, oh, it makes sense, A, that he would say it like that, and B, that it would take a little extra time. So I love that kind of stuff. But yeah, they meet in Bilbao in Spain, which, by the way, Patrick Klepek, this is wild. I can drive to that airport. That's that's amazing to me. But anyway, later on, they have lunch, and Carol continues to not cover herself in glory and has an emotional episode and ends up presumably killing more people. Learns a lot of information about the aliens, like that they like during the invasion, 886 million people died during the takeover. But then she wakes up the next day and Kumba Diabate is there, not because he likes her ideas, but because he wants to go to Vegas and he feels like he's connected with Zosha, who is her chaperone, and wants to request Carol's permission to take Zosha with him to Vegas. I think the idea is that, and it's very interesting the way that they communicate what the aliens or the hive mind or whatever you want to call it can and cannot do. It cannot harm other creatures and also cannot make a decision in a way that would distress one of the other humans, which I thought was interesting. And that's probably why
I feel like that is laying the groundwork for so much of what is to come, because that moment you get where she goes on the other aircraft and looks back at Carol itself feels like a betrayal of the hive mind already, like to express some sort of conflict over, and
perhaps.
I deeply suspect that, and Carol even sets up some sort of rhetorical traps with, well, we don't harm anyone. Well, how many people died as a result of the,
Right.
the joining, I think is what they call it. Like there is hypocrisy within the
Right.
pitch that the psychic glue is making, and
Yeah.
I wonder if like a big part of this show is going to be the discovery of individualism, or like radical acts of individualism by those in the hive mind and the collective, and what that means.
I also think that's why Carol at the end of the episode stands in front of Air Force One before it's able to take off, because she can't tell the pilot of her plane, hey, tell them to stop, because then it's going against what Kumba wanted. You know what I'm saying? So like she has to, but if she stands in front of Air Force One, they can't take off because they can't harm her. Right. So I thought that was kind of cool. Anyway, what is Carol going to do? I presume join them or try to get Zosha back. That's kind of what I think she's trying to. She's like, hey, I don't want to let Zosha go, which I think is a cool idea, because I think even in the short time they've been together, they've already bonded a little bit, even though Zosha is only just part of the collective. But anyway, any other thoughts or predictions or anything else you have to say about the first 2 episodes of Pluribus before we wrap up today, Patrick Klepek?
Well, what I would point out is that traditionally for a story like this, what would have happened in the meeting with the other folks like Carol is, let's band together and find a solution. And then you're spending the season subvert, like, we got to get back to the lab. Like, we got to figure out, we got to study this sequence. Like, turns out one of them is when she said, there's like it's so, I think this goes because of Gilligan's roots in X-Files, in episodic monster of the week storytelling. Like, there's the sequence where Carol is like, is anyone like a biochemist? She's talking through her dialogue is examining the tropes of these types of stories and what the arc would traditionally be of them next. And this show subverts all of that by saying Carol's actually on her own. We don't like the point of this show is not necessarily to stop this, or I'm sure that will be part of it. I expect there still to be like attempts made to sort of crack whatever's going on. But the fact that the show rejects the normal arc of a story like this and instead is going to be about the journey of essentially examining Carol's psychology, it's just a much more interesting show than like a race to try and break the psychic glue, even if that ends up becoming part of it at some point. I expect this show to arrive at that in a much smarter way if it chooses to go. That's the thing that's exciting, is like, I don't know what the arc of this show is, right? Like, any alien invasion pitch is about preventing or stopping something. And I don't know if this show is even about that.
Right. And I think you're right that a lesser show would have had the scene and it's like, yes, we have to stop them. But like, this show reveals there is a thing called cultural differences.
Well, now critically, we have not met 5 other people, like so there are other characters left to drop that may be more sympathetic to Carol's desire to break all this, and I expect those will come into play. And there's probably more than the 11, right? Like there's probably somehow there'll be more characters in this show, but it's just wild that there's really we'll see how much these other 5 play in to like being actual character. Are they just a plot device for Carol's development, or are these regular sort of
will they become their own characters that we actually grow to care about?
It's very easy to imagine this show doing very Lost-esque sort of flashbacks, right? Like, we're like, hey, like, what was happening to these characters like during the joining, like origin stories for them if they choose? Or will this show just be a very Carol like Reese Horn, like, she can handle the load? I mean, it's delightful, because I think if you watch Better Call Saul, which I'll bang the drum, if you haven't, you should.
Yes.
If this show gives you the inkling, you should go do it. It's a masterwork. And so much what makes that show work is her. And it's felt like this little secret. Like, that show was critically beloved, but not that popular. And it is like, when she got attached to this, it's like, oh, my little bird is going to fly. Everyone's going to know who she is and how
Right.
talented she is. And because it's just a totally different platform. And it's really exciting because she deserves it. She got no Emmy wins.
No Emmy wins. She was the secret weapon of that show.
It's why
She-
that, I mean,
yeah.
Bob Odenkirk was wonderful, but like
Yes.
what made that show sing was
Yes.
her, and got none of the some of the work she does in those final couple episodes of the show are just
incredible.
And so that's what makes me so happy. It's not only is this show good, it's an exceptional platform for what I feel like is now a budding superstar. Like she will leave this show and like will suddenly be everywhere in a way that she absolutely deserves.
Agreed.
Fly, Kim Wexler, fly.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.